Okay, today we're talking about really 2 years, boiled down to one, but 2022, it started out kind of on fire and then slowed down to a trickle at the very end.
It seems like the Fed was the wet blanket putting us out.
Yeah, but it started out strong in 2022. You know, even with the ups and downs, it was a very good year overall.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, best year in our Greenleaf's history.
Yeah, yep. We bought over $100 million worth of deals this year, and we spread that out across a couple different asset classes. So that's always exciting. We can do that. But one of the other parts too is we looked at how we buy all the deals and how much work goes into doing that. And some of our numbers from this year, we're always tracking like what are our metrics on how we do stuff. And we underwrote 381 full deals this year, which is a lot for us. I mean, that means we're looking at well over 1,000 or 2,000 potential deals. So we fully underwrote 381 deals, and we ended up sending out LOIs on 93 of them. And then we closed 16. So we kind of look at our close ratios on that, and we closed 17% of the deals that we sent offers out on, which for us is historically high. We used to be around 10% that we would close, and now we're hit 17% this year. So I think that shows a little more focused effort on what we're going after.
Yeah, I think it shows some of our tenure, some of our experience in the market, and our acquisition teams, that we've been building over the last 4 or 5 years has gotten better and better every year of looking at focused opportunities that we can actually close, that are live deals that are ready to get done.
Yeah. I think lots of GPs have different ways they look at, what is their definition of fully underwriting? Like, is it just the back of the envelope? Is it a full model? We're talking about a full model on every deal. So doing almost 400 of those is a good amount of legwork in a year to close 16 deals. But of the deals we did underwrite, we made offers on about 20% of those. And then, closing our ratios is pretty darn good.
Absolutely.
So we're happy with that for the year. Talking about what stuff we did buy. So we really spread things out across 5 asset classes this year.
Yeah. I mean, starting with medical, we bought Duke Medical up in Raleigh. A great asset with some opportunity to lease it up. It was 80% occupied. We have 20% more to lease up that we're negotiating right now. 5-6 months later after owning the deal.
Yeah, that was a good one. We also bought a lot of government stuff, and really government and medical too were situations where we could find deals that had good long-term rent escalations.
And one of our government deals, West Park, allowed us to enter into a new market that we didn't have any other assets in, Columbia, South Carolina, that we then opened up the door to buy more assets when we end up buying Top Notch, one of our flex properties.
Yeah, that's the next asset class.
Yeah.
So we talk about medical and government, and then we also moved into flex this year as well. I mean, we've been buying flex for really the past 3, almost 4 years now, but this year we also definitely added some more flex. That was the largest asset class that we acquired. This year we bought just over $30 million worth of flex, and some of our flex is actually office though as well. So we bought some assets that were office, but kind of a flex style to it. So, but over $30 million worth of that, and into the new market of Columbia, South Carolina. Columbia was like it's like our Birmingham, Alabama. Like, we have looked at a bunch of deals in that market, and including Birmingham, in the past 10 years, and have bought. It's been hard for us to really get in or find something that worked for us.
So you remember the first time we went to Columbia, South Carolina, and looked at a deal?
Ooh, no.
We went. It must have been like 20.
Oh, that was with Joe. We were
Joe.
going to get him a Miata.
Yep, exactly.
We bought a deal.
Tough guy, and he convinced us to stay at his house overnight.
It's because we were too cheap to buy a hotel. We're like, we'll drive out and drive back.
Exactly. We went out to dinner with him. We had a good time. He was like, "Hey, come spend the night at my house. We just had a baby. You can meet my wife and the baby in the morning." We were like, what? We're probably imposing a little bit, right? It's a little bit much. We just met you, and he's like, "No." He's like, "Don't worry. I was in the Marines, and you guys try anything funny at my house, like
I'll just kill you.
I'll just kill you both. I won't think twice about it." So, but Joe was a great host, and we had a good time in Columbia, South Carolina, the first time, and then we went back.
Yeah, we're finally back, and we got some great opportunities there now. So that was very positive. The other part, retail. We did buy a bunch of retail deals this year, which have been very good for us, and they've definitely added. All of our retail deals are making every quarter distributions going forwards. We have good rent escalations in those. So also great assets. And it took us to, we bought some of our first deals in Texas because of that as well.
Yeah, two. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was neat about the retail was at the beginning of the year, we extended some leases and sold one of our assets with brand new leases on it. And then we used that model to buy even more this year. We bought a couple 1 and 2 year leases, signed extensions, and created a lot of value. And so this year we sold the Aspen Dental Strip Center. And we also sold one of our Dollar Generals that we bought with 1-2 years on the lease, extended them to 5 to 10 years, and made a lot of money on the cap rate compression.
We created that value by signing that lease, and then converted that value to actual equity.
Yes.
Through that sale process. So that's a big part of one of our success. If we go back at other deals that we exited this year, we were converting value to equity. Last asset class though too is we bought our biggest deal we've ever bought in the Midtown complex up in Chattanooga. And this one, when we look at our numbers internally, we allocated it to office, and it was just over a $25 million deal, but it really has everything. There's nothing it doesn't have. It has retail in there. We have some standalone medical eye care center that's in there. We have a very large government lease that's in there as well.
The Chattanooga Library is in there.
And then we have some actual standard office that's in that facility. So that was a great acquisition for us. We rolled funds from 2 of our apartment deals that we exited into that. So very good position there. So if we think about why did we buy? We bought all this stuff really in the beginning of the year too. I mean, some of this trickled through into the third and fourth quarter, but for the most part, these were all opportunities where we could see long-term escalations when inflation was really it's still very much a hot topic right now, but when it was ramping up, we started to see new leases with rent escalations that were in the 3-4% range, which historically they've been 1 or 1.5. So we got some of these leases now where we have 3 and 4% annual rental rate escalations on a big chunk of our assets, which we think looking at that 5-7 years out is going to be very beneficial. But
yeah, and
we'll see.
Yeah, at the same time, we locked in those lease rates. We also locked in our debt at fixed rates when rates were still very reasonable. Most of them under 4.5, a handful under. Yeah, it was like 4.
This inflection point of we were seeing really high annual escalations, but we could still get debt in the 4% range.
Right.
So that was really the focus of the buying there. And on the flex side was opportunities where we could take a really operationally underperforming asset and move tenants out, or if they were vacating, spend the TI dollars and lease that at 3-4 times the rental rate that was there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the more interesting ones we bought in Doraville was a 25,000 square foot building that was fully occupied by an owner operator, and he was closing his business and moving elsewhere. We bought the property, we divided it up into different suites, and leased the whole thing up within 90 days of buying it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of demand for that smaller size flex stuff, and that's really where we saw the bulk of our flex asset acquisitions were in that space. So let's talk a little bit about what we sold this year. So that was really our buying highlights, but let's look at what we sold, because we're always trying to make sure that we realize our value that's created, and that can really only be done through a sale. So we have to look at our portfolio each year and determine, are there assets that we're going to sell? And in a big way, we have been doing that over the past 3-4 years, is looking at deals that have performed well from a valuation standpoint, but for whatever reason are not able to meet reserve thresholds, or they're not able to make continual distributions. And those are the assets that we're looking at selling. And we did that again this year. With really all of the assets we sold, we're talking about assets that were not making consistent quarterly distributions. If we look at some of these, the most recent one really was our mobile homes. We sold Beaver Creek and Point South, 2 mobile home parks that we had bought together, and we had owned those. We bought those in 2018, so just about 4 years.
Right, and they were good parks. They operated well and did what they did. But over time, what we realized is that we could not consistently control the turnover. The expenses were higher than our other parks that we had, and so it was just time to sell them. And the market was so ripe to, sell into.
Yeah, and it's so asset specific, right? I mean, within 30 minutes of those mobile home parks, we have 4 or 5 others that are doing fine. And when we decided this year too, when those loans came up, that we would renew the loans and hold those assets. So it's very much asset specific on kind of how these things are performing. And if they're not making those distributions, they're not meeting those reserve requirements, we did sell those. We also did that with some of our apartments as well. We sold Hillcrest this year, which was 138 unit townhomes.
Yeah, we bought that one years ago. It was our first property.
I think we bought that in 2015.
Right. Yeah, give or take.
So we had that almost 7 years. And that was another one. It had made distributions, but it just wasn't consistent over the life of the deal. So we felt that 2022 with the market, especially in the beginning of the year, what the market was like, take advantage of these valuations and exit some of these apartment and mobile home positions. And we've now been doing that for we started selling really aggressively the residential stuff in 2019.
Right.
And we haven't bought any residential since then.
Right, correct.
So we're looking at 4 years of really realizing these higher valuations in the residential side and exiting those assets. So. All right, what else do we want to cover on this one as we wrap up 2022? If we dive into some lessons that we learned.
Yeah.
Stuff. There's always good things that we learn throughout a year. And you got to keep in mind the perspective that we are coming from is, yes, we're the syndicator and we're packaging the deals together, but we're also the operator. So we're constantly looking at what operational improvements can we make to our deals. And we really feel that the value we create is led operationally. We're always trying to identify opportunities where we can use our operations to realize that value.
Right, and I think that's a good point to make, because there's lots of other groups out there. There's lots of other syndicators out there. There's a distinction between the syndicators that operate their own assets and the ones that do not, and they use third-party management. We've looked at the model over the years, and we've always decided that, you know what, we want to be operators. We are good at operations. That's what we focus on. That's what we care about, and we enjoy continuing to operate.
That over the years too, that's limited us to what we can and can't do. It's limited the footprint that we can take on. It's limited the type of assets that we can buy. Even some of our flex stuff or most of our office, a lot of it is similar in style, in complexity to the residential stuff that we were doing. So on one point, I think those limitations are good. I think it keeps us focused in kind of the assets that we are buying. But the other part, we do not have a national footprint. We really focus on the 85 corridor. We've bought some stuff, and we talk about buying stuff in Texas. We bought retail deals out there where there is very little day-to-day management of any kind that we have to do. So most of our operational assets are pretty contained to our navigable footprint that we can get to.
Yeah, on the retail front, when we look out of state, we go out, we physically fly out there and visit it. We have a physical inspection of it, and once a year we go in and check on it to make sure that the roof and the ACs and everything's being maintained as that operator continues.
Andrew will have to do a whole video series on his lunches at the different places that he's going to.
Just watch.
It's an expensive lunch to think about. You got to go fly somewhere to eat some pancakes and come back, but worth it when we need to go check on things. So a couple things that we learned this year, and again, talking about like operational stuff. I think one of the biggest hurdles we had this year was really software.
Yeah, software is always a battle.
Which, gosh, it's like it feels like sometimes software is just a constant headache.
Let's rewind a little bit. Like, let's think about with no software, free software. Back in the day, we used to collect when we bought our first apartment property. I used to go by there every Saturday and collect whatever dollar bills they had for me.
Dollar bills and money orders.
Yes, exactly.
Writing it down, yeah. So I guess it's easier and more scalable than that, but still comes with a lot of hurdles. So our property management software that we use is software service. And software of service, that model has, that's exploded over the past dozen years.
Taking over the world.
Yeah, about how ingrained software as a service is. But in our experience this year, we ran into some hurdles. We were highly dependent on our management software. And the platform we were using at the time, it was a system where you didn't necessarily have your own instance of that software. So if a change was made for another client, it would also impact your instance of it. And it put us in a situation where changes within the software would be rolled out and things within our instance of the software would change or be different, and it would throw a wrench into some of our operating processes. And we'd have team members that come like, hey, this doesn't work now, or why did you change the way we're doing things? And it's like, well, we didn't know we changed. What did we change? And obviously as a leader, that's not the answer. That's not the answer a team member's looking for. That's not the answer you want to give as a leader, being like, well, I don't know why it changed, or I don't know why it's broken. I don't know when it's going to be fixed. That doesn't necessarily instill confidence in a team. So we started to have a lot of those issues this year where our software as a service stuff was really hitting roadblocks, and it was hurting not only how we were able to execute, we were constantly trying to build manual workarounds to stuff, which was a challenge. I mean, as simple as one of the things was the journal entries. Like if you think about basic accounting and you're going to make a journal entry, within the software, there was some glitch where if you made a journal entry, you could not edit it, you couldn't delete it, you couldn't change it. So you had this, it would just create like a backlog of when is this going to be able to be fixed so we can move our accounting stuff forwards. That was preventing us from really doing closing entries. Basic stuff that we've done for years that now became a challenge because of the software. So that was definitely a wake-up call for us. We're highly dependent on one software, and how that software as a service was built made it challenging for us. So we switched a bunch of our assets in the middle of this year. It's always challenging moving systems, but we started that process this year. We have more to do in 2023, but that definitely was a hurdle that we faced this year, and a definite challenge. So if we look at some other stuff that we learned, we're always kind of looking at. You look at the P&L at the end of the month, and you're always going through and be like, okay, how did revenues look? How did expenses look? And for the most part, trying to pick okay, do we want to try and grow revenues and spend money to do that, or do we want to cut expenses and increase our margins in that route? So you always got to keep an eye on both. But this year, another big one we hit was bank fees. Or the lack of bank interest.
Yeah. I mean, with all the volume of banking that has gone on with lending and the growth of commercial real estate over the last couple of years, it seems like they've kind of lost track of what's going on. And we noticed in some of our accounts.
Sure. Purely from the bank aggregation.
Yes,
continual aggregation of banks.
We have one bank that got bought twice in the same month. They were in the process of getting sold. They had a very orderly sale, and then another bank came in and bought that bank, and they didn't even know it was happening. So we think that the outcome of all that bank consolidation, it's just kind of led to a little bit of messiness. And we've seen it on some of our accounts that we were being charged pretty absorbent fees just to park cash there.
Yeah. So, and I guess if that's coming from the consolidation point is where it could be, because we look at you have a business checking account, and that bank gets bought through 2, 3, 4 times, and then how that business checking account is administered at that bank and the fees change with it. So that kind of picked up around I guess it really gained steam in the third quarter, where we were starting to get charged a couple $1,000s a month for bank fees. And this is something that's, obviously no one's excited, wow, I got hit with bank fees. I should have known that. But we're looking at a monthly basis, and these fees hit retroactively for the time in the past. And they're based on, balance thresholds, how many accounts you have, incoming, outgoing transactions, wires. There's a whole formula that adds up to your bank fee for the month. And that formula, as it changed in 2023, literally interest rates are going up, but we're not seeing a gain of interest rates on our accounts, and we're seeing higher bank fees. It's the opposite of what we would have expected. And it caught us off guard a little bit, and we consolidated a bunch of bank accounts. We put different checking and operating accounts with banks that had better fee structures, but we got up to the point where we're spending $2,000 to $3,000 a month on bank fees that are, those ones hurt. Those ones hurt because you feel like you can, we should have been on top of it a little bit better. But also once we saw those, we were able to adjust pretty quickly and move things. It's just another one of those like, you see that money taken out and it sucks. And yeah, it's definitely not a good feeling. But so yeah, definitely a lesson on that one. You got to keep an eye on those and constantly checking not only what they are, but if the formula to calculate those things is changing in the future, what it's going to be. The other side of that too is we're very much on, what interest rates are we getting on some of our savings accounts that we have, because we've always talked about our reserves, and our reserves go into savings accounts with our banks or money market interest bearing accounts, and seeing if those accounts are also adjusting with the times as rates significantly went up. We really had to look at those. And some of our banks, obviously every bank is different, but some are much higher than others. So it's definitely a good spot to find ancillary income when you're looking at your assets. Say like, hey, can we just make sure all of our, reserve cash is in an interest-bearing account, and what is that amount? Right. Okay, so that's two good points that we learned. The last one, we're going to touch base on one more point, contracts.
Yeah, so historically, when we go to buy a property, we negotiate a purchase and sale agreement. It usually takes 2 to 4 weeks from the point that we say we're going to buy this, and the seller says they want to buy it. It takes about 2 to 4 weeks of negotiating, of getting all the fine tuning in place that they want to sell it and we want to buy it. We end up usually with like a 40 to 60 page contract that we're all really excited to sign at the end of the day. And but that usually governs just about anything that can possibly go wrong, except one thing: if you don't care about the contract at all.
That's hard to put in paperwork right there.
So a couple times this year, we went through that whole process, 2 to 4 weeks of negotiating, covering every point you could possibly cover, and did our due diligence and got to the point of wanting to buy the deal. And the seller just decided, no, I don't want to anymore. And we reminded them they have a contract and they're obligated to, under law, to proceed with it. And they said, sue me. So when, in an environment like that, it's pretty hard to navigate how to transact with people. It's
painful. I mean, that was those situations too, where, once we have those contracts, we're like, okay, hey, let's go spend money and try and execute this deal. We've got, an endless amount of checklist of things that have to be done, from property inspections, right? Get bank accounts, entity structures, operating agreements. So we start working on all this stuff, and we spend a good amount of money, not only physical dollars to a vendor, but also internal time and energy to settle this stuff up, and then have it just kind of be like pooped on. It's like, what the heck? And they back out and they're like, sue us. It's like, well, we don't want to. We just want to follow the contract
buy the property
and buy what we were talking about doing. Man, so those were, I don't know if there's a good way to get around that. We've now going into 2023 using different triggers for when we're going to go spend money on stuff.
Right. It's amazing because we've always led with buying from other people, not institutions, that are reasonable and that we can have conversations with and show that, we are people as well, and we're putting our best foot forward, and we want to work with you to buy your property. And it's disappointing when we run into issues like these that we have to fall back on the legal system.
Right. And I think too, when we look at how we buy, we've always been the proponent of making sure we have a broker involved, because it helps that communication so much into get a deal. Not only like, hey, there's one thing to go find the deal and be like, oh, we found a great deal and we're going to buy it. To get it over the finish line, like they're very much an important part of that process. And then also making sure it's as goofy as to bring it up, but that you got to make sure that the seller has an attorney. We've done a bunch of closings where we were the seller's closing attorney as well. And our attorney is always kind of looking at us at the corner of our eye like, in what situation does this work? But I mean, we've done that. We've probably had a deal like that every year, where we're also the seller's closing attorney.
Absolutely.
We can't really do that going forward. Now, after getting bitten by that a couple of times, we've got to make sure those sellers all have actual attorneys that they're able to close something with.
So with some of the lessons we've learned this year, there was quite a bit of silver lining that we also redeemed this year with our big win, that Dave and I have always been big proponents of long-term fixed debt, and over the last couple of years, interest rates have basically been free, especially if you're willing to float your debt.
Well, we
and
still
go
have to make
short-term.
mortgage payments, but they've been cheap comparatively. But I mean, so many were just doing the floating rate loans.
Yeah, but
interest-only.
in the sub 3%, you can do floating rate short-term loans, pretty easily, pretty quickly. And we've always gone kind of the harder route of getting that minimum of 5-year fixed rate loan. And our rates were in the, historically they were in the mid 3s, then they moved up to the mid 4s, and now they're higher than that. But
on new deals.
On new deals.
Our existing stuff is still down there.
Yeah, but our existing stuff, I think our average debt maturity we went through is 2028. Yeah. And our average rate was sub 4.25. I mean, that for what, over?
Yeah, we don't really have any loan renewals on assets until like 2020, end of 2024. Yeah, that's really our next first one that comes up, and then a lot of stuff after that, even out to 2030. All at really low rates. So that's been a big win for us, not only from a, we have our cost in line, but like from a stress component of like, we don't have any big floating rate, mountains to climb on our debt coverage ratios. So that's definitely been a win for the past 6 months, having that in place.
And talking about debt coverage ratios, we, looking forward into 2023 and likely into 2024 as well, is that, the biggest transition that we foresee happening is really that transition from buy a deal and flip it, or buy a deal, do some light improvements and flip it before you have to operate it. Like get out before you have to worry about the income statement. We think the biggest transition will be the guys that really focus on debt coverage ratios. Debt coverage ratio, to clarify, is really the ratio of your net income over your debt payment. And banks like to see a minimum of 1.3 on that. And some banks like to see higher, maybe 1.5 or even 1.8. But they want to see a substantial a substantial amount of cash flow above your mortgage payment every month.
Yeah, and going into this year, beginning of 2022, you could essentially buy a deal, do your value creation, and exit it within 12, 18 months maybe, before kind of any of these debt covenants were triggered, or before you even were doing that math. And you're just transacting on a valuation. So say if I'm getting a 70% loan to value and I can increase the value, now I can go sell it and someone else can get 70% loan to value on that as well. But as you start to have to hold those deals, and you can't just go sell it to the next person, you're going to have to operate, and you are going to have to meet those debt covenants. And the debt covenants don't care what the loan to value ratio is. You could be 90% or 10%. They don't care if the debt covenant is just a factor, like you said, of your net income over what your total debt payments are. And that's going to be the driving force of 2023, is making sure those metrics work.
Right. And so with interest rates as high as they've moved to, for the most part, we're seeing them in the 6.5% to 7.5% range. That coverage is going to be a lot tighter on most assets, and it's going to be the primary driving force.
With new debt.
With new debt.
Yep.
Yeah.
If you're going to get an asset with 6-7% debt on it, your debt coverage ratio is going to be a whole lot different than if you have 3% debt.
So when we saw last year that we'd be buying assets with up to 75% leverage, I think our highest one might have been 77% leverage. This year we're seeing that peak at 65, but more realistically, I think we'll do deals in the 50 to 55% leverage range.
Definitely.
So,
yeah, I mean, your interest rate's double, your payment's going to be significantly higher. Deals can only cover so much. I think also looking at 2023, operators that are able to expand margins on existing deals. We talked about our rent escalations that we have annually that are being in place, but also controlling expenses in an environment where expenses are rising. We did a fairly good job of that this year. We had our expense rate growth on controllable expenses was in the 2 to 3% range. So we feel good about those numbers, but it's going to be key for operating deals in 2023, being able to expand margins on existing assets with what you have. Okay. Anything? What else do you think in 2023?
It's gonna be
at the beginning. It's going to be slow. It's
Yes.
too hard to project way far out there, but definitely margin oriented to start with.
Absolutely, and that conversation between buyers and sellers is probably going to be a little frozen, probably through the first quarter, and to see kind of where it's going to lead.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to kind of release that little bit of a log jam, but right now it's definitely, buyers and sellers are kind of both on the side. No one's really jumping in the center yet. So hopefully that changes in the beginning of the year. There could be many things that trigger that, but any kind of change in the market always says, okay, how are we going to get people back to the table to do stuff? And maybe with a contract.
Right, exactly.
That works and we can actually utilize. And an attorney on both sides.
Attorney on both sides, yep.
Little things like that.
Just check out those little boxes.
Little goals for 2023. So, okay, well, that's a recap of 2022. Hope this was helpful. Give you some insight into what we saw for the year, what we learned, and we're excited about taking this forwards for 2023. It'll be our 15th year.
Big one.
So,
big one.
I don't know what's the anniversary gift for 15. I'm not sure what that is. But anyways, thanks everyone. For more tips on operating and investing in real estate, please check us out at greenleafmanagement.com or find us on YouTube and Spotify.